Folate. This vitamin gets its name from the Latin word folium, which means leaf. And it gets this name because leafy green vegetables are generally very good sources of folate. So what is folate? It falls under the category of the water-soluble B vitamins. It is found in foods and supplements, and it has two different forms that we see commonly in our diet. It's formerly known as folacin, and folate and folic acid are essentially the same thing. However, there's some structural differences. So food folates are polyglutamates, but folic acid will always be a monoglutamate. So if you look at this diagram on the right, you can see that the folic acid molecule just has one glutamate molecule. That's what identifies this as folic acid. If it had more than one glutamate molecule, then it would be called folate. Folic acid is used in dietary supplements and fortified foods. So the recommended intakes. First, let's remember what an RDA is just really fast. It's an average daily intake sufficient to meet the needs of approximately 98% of healthy individuals. For males, adolescent to adult, it's 400 micrograms. Females not pregnant or lactating, adolescent to adult, it's also 400 micrograms. But females of the same age group, adolescent to adult, who are pregnant, have a much higher need at 600 micrograms. And also, again, this same age group, if they're lactating, their RDA is 500 micrograms. There's only an AI, adequate intake, set for infants, and those for infants 0 to 6 months, that's 65 micrograms. For an infant 7 to 12 months, it's 80 micrograms. And just kind of an interesting note, average folate intake in the US exceeds the normal RDA, but pregnant women are still at risk for deficiency due to their increased need of folate. So how does folate move through the body? First, it's hydrolyzed in the GI tract, and their enzymes remove excess glutamates, leaving just the glutamate form. So as we saw in the diagram earlier, that's what it's going to look like after it's hydrolyzed. It'll just have the one glutamate molecule. This structure is then going to be absorbed via active transport in the small intestine. However, large doses, pharmacological doses, or supplementation are absorbed by passive diffusion. Then the portal vein delivers the monoglutamate form from the small intestine to the liver. There, it's either stored or further transported to body tissues. Once it's in a body cell, it is converted to a polyglutamate form, which cannot then leave the cell. Folate is excreted from the liver along with bile, and some is reabsorbed in the enterohepatic circulation, which is basically how your body recycles bile. Alcohol interferes with the enterohepatic circulation, which affects folate levels, and we'll take a look at that later when we talk about deficiency. So functions of folate, it mainly functions as a coenzyme for a few different body processes. We're going to take a look at some of those. It works in synthesis and the maintenance of new cells. It works in metabolic pathways, particularly amino acid metabolism. And it works in DNA synthesis quite a bit. So in DNA synthesis, the folate coenzyme supplies the methylene group needed to synthesize some nitrogenous bases for DNA, such as thymine, adenine, and guanine. Just for your GWiz file, the vitamin B12 coenzyme is required to recycle the folate coenzyme needed for DNA synthesis. Therefore, deficiencies in both vitamins can actually produce similar symptoms. And again, we'll take a closer look at that in a couple slides. So methotrexate is a cancer medication, and this actually interferes with THFA synthesis, which affects DNA synthesis. The medication stops cancerous cells, but also other cells that form rapidly, such as intestinal cells, red blood cells, etc. And its side effects mimic folate deficiency, and this can lead to complications because any damage to DNA due to folate deficiency may also affect cancer risk. Its function in metabolism. So like I said before, it's mainly metabolism of amino acids. It converts glycine to serine, which is the main source of methyl groups needed for DNA synthesis for THFA. It converts histidine to glutamic acid, and THFA and vitamin B12 convert homocysteine to methionine. Some other functions, just for your information, it helps in the formation of neurotransmitters, which are important hormones in the brain, such as serotonin, norepinephrine, and dopamine. Some studies suggest that supplementing antidepressants with folic acid may actually improve treatment. So natural food sources of folate, this is not folic acid, we're talking about natural folate, include fruit juices, vegetables, and grains, and some beans, legumes, nuts, things like that. The most bioavailable forms are liver, legumes, leafy green vegetables, and also avocados and oranges. A couple other leading sources include orange and grapefruit juice, bread, lettuce, potatoes, and milk. Some fortified food sources, you're mainly going to find these in your bread and grain products. So that includes bread, cereal, flour, cornmeal, rice, pasta, and corn masa, and other various grain products. Because these products are widely consumed in the US, their fortification has notably increased average folate intake across America. This program, started by the FDA in 1998, meant to increase folate intake by 100 micrograms per day, but ended up increasing intake by almost twice that amount. Other countries, such as Canada, Costa Rica, Chile, and South Africa, have also mandated folic acid fortification for certain of their foods. All right, so folate deficiencies. These can get pretty serious. The main ones are megaloblastic anemia and neural tube defects. We're going to talk about megaloblastic anemia first. So, megaloblastic anemia is when red blood cells do not lose their nuclei and divide as they should, and therefore they remain in their large immature state. As you can see in this picture, the red blood cells on top have lost their nucleus, and they're going to have that divot that's characteristic of normal red blood cells. But the ones on the bottom with the purplish blue masses inside, those still have their nuclei, and they're going to be really big and bulgy, and so they don't leave the bone marrow. Those that do, if the bigger bulgy ones do make it out, they're called macrocytes. Therefore, the name megaloblastic or macrocytic anemia. Neural tube defects, which are on the next slide, they come from a lack of folate during the first trimester of pregnancy, and children are born with neural tube defects. Folate affects the formation of the neural tube during the first trimester of pregnancy, and the highest rates of these defects come in Hispanic and white populations, and the lowest rates are found in Black and Asian populations. Some other symptoms of deficiency are listed here, such as a decrease in blood folate concentration, decrease in red cell folate, defective DNA synthesis, a change in structure of certain white blood cells, increase in blood concentration of homocysteine, and then the last three refer strictly to megaloblastic anemia, like I just described. So the neural tube defects include spina bifida and anencephaly. Spina bifida is when the spinal cord or spinal fluid bulges through the back, and the picture on the left depicts this. When there is a defect in the formation of the neural tube, it affects how the backbones form a complete ring to encase the spinal cord. So the neural tube forms the brain, spinal cord, spinal nerves, and spinal column. And so if the backbones don't totally encase that, then it can bulge out and cause either a little pocket or just totally bulge out of the back. Some symptoms of spina bifida include paralysis, incontinence, hydrocephalus, which is buildup of fluid in the brain, and learning disabilities. Anencephaly is the absence of a brain, and children with anencephaly die shortly after birth. Groups at risk include women of childbearing age, pregnant women, impoverished individuals, alcoholics, people with chronic gastrointestinal diseases, because these impair absorption of folate, people who use certain medications like anticonvulsants, and people with vitamin B12 deficiency. Now, toxicity, there's a UL set at 1 milligram or 1,000 micrograms. And this UL is established only for synthetic forms of folic acid because folate from foods isn't absorbed as well, so it doesn't have adverse effects. Folate toxicity doesn't have too many symptoms, but the biggest problem is that it can mask a vitamin B12 deficiency. So from the media and literature, I found it was kind of interesting. There were some current concerns just recently within the past few years that excessive folate intake may put pregnant mothers at a higher risk of delivering an autistic child. There's not nearly enough evidence to back up this claim, although some studies suggest that toxic levels of folate may have adverse effects relating to autism spectrum disorder. So women of childbearing years are still recommended to get enough folate in their diet and even take supplemental folate if they need to, especially when trying to have children. So basically my takeaway from this is that we do know for sure that folate helps prevent neural tube defects. And so it's important for mothers to get enough folate, particularly prior to and during the earliest stages of conception and development. Finally, just some fun facts to leave with you. So earlier when I was talking about the food sources, I said potatoes and milk. Well, they themselves aren't particularly rich in folate, but since they're consumed in such high amounts, they actually contribute significantly to folate intake. Also, the bioavailability of food sources of folate is about 50 to 80% of that of folic acid in fortified foods. And finally, food processing can destroy about 50 to 90% of folate in food. And that is the end. Thanks for watching.